Lowe's knows how to get your lawn ready for spring. And right now, you can take up to $10 off select Scott's fertilizers. Plus, you can save $50 on a Craftsman 20-volt 13-inch string trimmer and leaf blower combo kit. Now just $99. Get set for spring. Visit us in-store or online today because Lowe's knows home improvement. Valid 3/23 through 4/5. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. Excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, here to talk about today's press conference the Ravens did on the draft upcoming. EDC out there with John Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz, people that know an awful lot about the Ravens draft direction and will tell us almost nothing about it, in particularly what is one of often several liars' luncheons that you can get before the draft. Anyway, joining me to talk about this is Alec Poulianos. Alec, how you doing?
Doing well, Ken. Excited to talk about this Liars Luncheon. I wish I was there, have some lunch. It seems like a nice little event.
I don't know actually if there actually is lunch at this. It might just
there
be
is. It's at 11. I saw it on the
Okay.
board. Yeah, someone posted the schedule. So I guess they all have lunch first and then they chit chat.
Yeah. Just well, of course, the topic everybody wanted to ask about, and there were three questions about this in the first 4 minutes and 40 seconds, was Lamar Jackson. How's Lamar Jackson contract going? And they tried to redirect and say, hey, we're going to try and respect the process. EDC, came out and said that he wants to respect the process and talk about the draft in this particular segment. Some of the panning across the panel there, particularly, the look on John Harbaugh's face with regard to Lamar Jackson's contract and what a very stone countenance. Mm-hmm. And do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, I saw it and just they look so uncomfortable up there with regards to those questions. And then we had the interjection from Ravens PR to basically stop asking the questions.
Yes.
And I think that just really set a tone. I've watched a lot of these press conferences before. I've never quite seen something like that.
Yeah, it was a strange kind of a thing. There were three questions in the first 440 anyway there. They talked about the strong cornerback position, which is good. That's, obviously a directly addressing the draft and as an area of need for the Ravens. DaCosta mentioned there might be 4 or 5 or even 6 guys who were first round talents.
Yep, I'd agree with that. And I think it is nice, we'll get into it later in his comments, that there is depth at the places that they're most looking to address.
Great point there. I'm going to sit down on the cornerbacks with Michael Crawford tomorrow. Nice. Have that discussion, and that should be out on Friday, I believe. So you'll have an extra long time where that's the podcast over the weekend to kind of get to. But Michael always has very good insights into draftable players and whatnot. And I have some hot and cold guys of my own in this in the cornerback group. Who do you really like out of that group? Do you have one?
Oh, Gonzalez is my favorite. I love him. Yeah, when I first watched him, I was like, this is the best corner, and I still feel that way. He's my number one.
Okay, I understand why Gonzalez would be the first guy taken. And if it's just a question between Gonzalez and my guy, then I would take Gonzalez. If they're both on the board at the same time and the Ravens are picking, that's not going to happen because Gonzalez will be gone long before the Ravens select. But the guy I really love, despite some of the size limitations that are associated with him, is Malcolm Forbes. And to me, he looks like a Marcus Peters-esque player in terms of his gambling instincts. They're just at an incredibly high level. Guys made to play cover 3 zone corner, and it'd just be very interesting to see him do that. He's got good length and whatnot, but his ability, his ability to read the quarterback and break on the football, absolutely outstanding. And replacing Peters with another Peters is just it'd be very exciting to me.
Oh yeah, for sure. He's a great prospect, number 21 on Jason's big board at the moment. So right in that sweet spot for we could maybe draft him.
Yeah, could be at the intersection of need and value streets, as I always say when they get the Ravens get on the board at 22. It's got a bunch of players who might be there. There'll be some corners left, I presume. At that point, I don't think we're going to have a run of 4 or 5 corners that are going to go all in a row like we saw the wide receivers go last year. I think there's some graduation. And I think there's actually, because of that, I think there's going to be some impetus to wait at corner for a lot of teams. So we'll see if the Ravens get their guy at 22.
Yeah, I think that's going to play in both the wide receiver and the corner position because of the abundance. There might be a little bit of, well, we wanted to get the last guy. What would be the first one to take?
So DaCosta mentioned the fans will be happy. It's a strong receiver class. I think I'm pretty well coaching that. And I would kind of hope Eric DaCosta, particularly this time of year, is not being a slave to Twitter. And he mentioned one scout who was definitely not on Twitter at the end of the thing. I want to talk about him when we get down to that part of the conference. But I would hope he's not being a slave to Twitter too much, because, boy, you don't want to pick anybody but a wide receiver if you look at the Ravens fans on Twitter. I mean, I think they're much more likely to pick a corner than a wide receiver. And when I say much more likely, 45, 35 at corner and 20 at the field is where I would still have it about right now. But I just think there's a high probability they end up picking a corner.
Sure. I think so too. It just makes a lot of sense to me. I also think if you aren't steadfast on assuming 22 is going to be a Ravens pick, then it's reasonable to trade back and get both of those guys in the 40s and 50s and feel pretty good about who you got. So I would love that strategy, but I don't, even though, EDC opened up basically broadcasting, he's interested in acquiring more picks. And I think specifically interested in acquiring picks in the first 85, like before that third round pick. Like that's where they're at.
Okay. So I'm going to look at the draft tech thing here. The Ravens have 1,025 total JJ points this year. 780 of them, over 75%, are in that number one pick. Yep. If they don't trade down with the number one pick, they're not really picking up picks of much value. They might be picking up extra 6, extra 7 for trading down in the fourth round kind of thing, but they're not. It's not going to be a real exciting accumulation of additional picks. I thought one of the interesting things that he mentioned was that they'd had a number of consecutive years with additional picks. This is a year where they're light on picks. They want to get more picks. But on the other hand, they've had some problems getting everybody a spot on the roster year after year. Obviously, this has contributed to them breaking their UDFA streak as well, though I didn't really mention that. And it is a question: do you really have enough room if you are consistently beating the hell out of the compensatory draft system?
Yeah, no, I think that that's kind of getting to my point. I think they have more needs than 75% of their draft capital to attack a problem.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. Great point.
And they need to split it. So it's like splitting your hand at blackjack, right? It's a smart play. I really am hoping that they're able to do it. I think if they do pick there, it's like either a guy that's super high up on their board, like a la Hamilton, that they decide to pick there, or there's just no one to tango. So we'll see how it plays out. But I definitely agree with you. And with DaCosta, I think they can't draft more than 6 or 7 guys. Like they might want more picks, but they really I feel like if they draft more than that, you're going to get into problems of how they make the team, unless there's a bunch of injuries we don't want.
Yeah, I mean there will be some of that, and they have some flexibility with the 54th through 57th guys in terms of getting a Brent Urban, for example, on the temporarily cut this section. But anyway, he was very classy about that. Really appreciate that from the interview. Yeah. Let's hope that split we're talking about, though, and this is where I think this is really important, is more like splitting aces than splitting eights. It's what you're describing, and I agree with the strategy anyway. I mean, I think they really need to trade down. It's more like defensive splitting of I've got a hand that can't possibly suit my needs now, and I have to trade down. If they get full value, great. If they don't, I'd be kind of upset with that. And we could have some long discussions about what constitutes full value, whether it's a Rich Hill type value or whether it's a JJ type value. But I think by broadcasting this, there is the possibility the Ravens will reduce their chance to get full value in trade down for that selection.
Mm-hmm. I think it barely does, because I think it's no secret that the Ravens are always interested in more picks and trading back. He mentioned that they've done it 9 times in the last 4 years, so they're very used to it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's certainly a good thing. He did say he was kind of confident, I believe was the word he used, that he'd be able to get more picks. One of the early good questions that related to QB, but was actually a pivot question on somebody told they couldn't ask a question about Lamar Jackson, was, are you looking at QB differently in this draft? And he said, I think we really are. Underscored best player available. They really want to be agnostic about their positions. Not exactly his words, I'm paraphrasing. But, they've got their board. They've got quarterbacks in the top 31 was something he said later. Is there a possibility they'll draft a quarterback? Sure, there's a possibility.
Yeah. Yep. And there is a single scenario where at 22, if there's a certain quarterback still on the board, which I would be absolutely stunned and floored by, then I'd be like, fine. I don't even care if Lamar's on the roster. I'd take him, and I would say, we'll figure it out. I'd be very willing to do that.
So is Levis your guy, or is AR-15?
It's all AR-15.
Yeah,
Levis doesn't exist to me.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. But I'd be very excited about AR-15. I the range of places where he could go is so great in this draft that's he could go in the top 5. 4. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he could go as early as 4 is definitely true. Or he could end up I could see Levis being the guy who goes ahead of him. If the Colts end up taking Levis, at number 4, or trade down even to get Levis, which would be, I think, a very smart strategy by them, then there's a possibility that AR-15 goes to Seattle at number 20, the Ravens at number 22. There's a few different possibilities where he could end up landing. I still think it's fairly unlikely he gets out of the first round, but that's still a lot of variation for a potential franchise quarterback in terms of where they might go. Not as much as Malik Willis last year, but a lot of variation. Yeah.
If he gets past 7, that's why I said last night on our show, if he gets past 7, I will be very surprised, and I think then it's all up in the air. His fall could be more than I expected, but I have a feeling he's going to go very early. I don't think it's even outside the realm of possibility he goes number 1. I don't think it will be. I think it's going to be Stroud, but I would applaud it if they did that. I think it's very ballsy, but I would be like, okay, I see you. I understand.
Yeah, that's well, it'd be interesting to see how that goes. Some good information. I thought that Ortiz didn't answer a lot of questions on this, but he did answer a good question about Todd Monken, that he got Todd Monken input, but one of the good things, and how does a new offensive coordinator impact your, who you think about drafting? He said, Monken says, I'm very versatile. You give me players, I'll do the best I can with them, kind of thing. Loved hearing that. Absolutely loved hearing that. I'm not sure we would have gotten any different party line, but I loved hearing that. It sounded genuine coming from him.
And it sounds correct based off everything we've heard about Monken and his philosophy towards the game. And that's what makes me excited about him. I think he's a chameleon offensive coordinator. He'll take what you give him and he'll make an offense that works. And I think that's a really excellent place to be for this franchise where they're at right now. And also just in general, I think that's the NFL. Teams change year over year. Yes, you have a core, but being flexible and willing to change for your personnel is key.
Right. Absolutely. EDC was asked, how does 5 picks impact your strategy? Only having 5 picks. And he's had an interesting answer there. He said he didn't have the same anxiety to watch a ton of players, given that they don't have, 6 picks in round 4. I think they had 5 picks entering the day, and then they picked up a 6th in round 4, if I recall correctly. So without all those low round picks, and they do have a pick in the 6th round, but they don't have a pick of the 5th, pick of the 6th, that he doesn't have the same anxiety to make sure he watches a larger field of draftable players. I paraphrase some there. I'm glad he's feeling less anxious about the thing. I don't think he would really ever let himself off the hook in terms of watching as much tape as he possibly could until what is effectively New Year's Eve for a general manager. The most important day of the year in terms of the biggest party of the year too, in terms of having draft day. But on the other hand, I look back to the draft 2 years ago and the fact that they didn't have a pick after round 5. And I think they significantly wasted that last pick on Ben Mason. Mm-hmm. I think they might have reached on some earlier players, most notably Brandon Stevens. Mm-hmm. And it was a draft I'm not particularly happy about the outcome from. So if they're really if I am being correct in hearing what he's saying here, I hope the Ravens still have plenty of options for round 6 and 7. I hope their scouts, the people in the room, are all as prepared as ever to draft in those rounds when you might get Geno Stone or you might get another player of real value in round 6 or 7. So just want to make sure they're there.
Yeah, and I will say this. I've had a lot of conversations about this draft with Jason and his big board, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's really just saying there's not that many draftable players this year compared to last year. And that's his around about way of saying that. Obviously I think they'll be prepared for all stages of the draft. But I'd also get the sense that maybe they're also taking the approach of they like certain tiers of guys and they just have confidence based on their, experience with the draft that they could pick and choose from those tiers confidently. They will get everyone they want to get. They have their favorites, so to speak. And with only 5 picks, they're going to get 5 of those guys. So they're almost thinking of the draft that way, where they've seen enough to know that they're going to be happy. But I just I didn't read too much into that. I think it might just be I don't know, wisdom over the years. He's I'm not going to stress myself out. Yeah,
that could be. We heard a couple times during this press conference how he's been doing this for 28 years now. So that was interesting, and one reporter asked a question about, are you concerned about a receiver and the questions that come and with having Pro Bowlers everywhere else, but not having Pro Bowlers or receiver. And he goes, you know what? If it wasn't that, it'd just be another position you'd be asking about. It's a great answer. I really loved it. It kind of made light of the situation to the appropriate degree, and also framed it up in a way that I think is very fair. That, consider all the successes we've had correctly at pretty much every other position in terms of Pro Bowlers being drafted and high rate of Pro Bowlers with early picks and using draft capital just effectively generally, as well as pretty much any other team in the NFL has over the Ravens' entire time here. And I think it speaks for itself that DaCosta and Newsome have been the biggest constants in the NFL, in the entire league, in terms of drafting since the Ravens came into the league.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Quarterbacks. Got asked about more of that. How many quarterbacks would not be a complete rebuild? He mentioned about 4 guys, but then he said you can get a good QB in any round. I think obviously he's talking about 4 guys who he thinks could maybe start in year 1, and it's the 4 everybody's thinking about in terms of Richardson, Stroud, and Levis, and who am I forgetting? Number 2 pick, Young. Probably. Yeah. Jeez, I forget him. And anyway, the guys at the top of the draft, he believes, they're going to rebuild on the fly, but he also thinks they can get what I suspect he would term project quarterbacks in a middle round.
Yeah, I think there are some really decent candidates later in the draft that they could pick on. I think that we had that discussion too last night about, I think this is a year where drafting a quarterback makes a lot of sense, not just because of the Lamar situation, but because of the Huntley situation. You got to restart that clock. Yeah. I mean, they do have Brown. That is an option for the clock restarting, but I think bringing another quarterback into the building will happen this year. It's just a matter of who. And there are some really nice prospects where they're not going to rock your socks off. I don't think they'll ever be a top 10 quarterback, but they can definitely be a top 18, and that gets you to the playoffs because you have a good team otherwise. So I think they're just being open and honest about that. this quarterback draft has some of those candidates, and they're also uniquely in a position to accept that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think that's your analysis there. I think is very good. I think the Ravens are likely to bring in a quarterback and try and at least have a competition there. I thought it was a quality competition with Anthony Brown last year. I thought having him around was a positive thing. Obviously, he ends up playing a game in the regular season because Huntley got hurt after Lamar. But even just what was happening during the preseason, I thought it's always healthy to have that. And I think that the Ravens had a legitimate question on their hands in terms of resetting the clock, even last year. And now they've got a huge question with regard to resetting the clock because not Anthony Brown, not Tyler Huntley, but a free agent at the end of this year. A UFA. He's an RFA this year. Another thing I want to talk about, somebody asked about Patrick Queen's fifth-year option. Not the forum, obviously, but DaCosta immediately used his question badminton racket and swatted it away and said, that's a discussion we'll have to have with Patrick. I think it's pretty clear the Ravens are not going to give Patrick Queen the fifth-year option if they have any way they can deal with that before. When connecting this back to the draft, there are three ways the Ravens can get more picks that really make sense. Number one is they can trade down from 22. And it's really got to be 22 because that's the only amount of value. And we talked about that early, so we don't need to repeat it. Number two, they can trade Lamar. And we hope it doesn't happen, but it might. And if it does, that's a lot of additional draft capital. Right now, the Ravens are one of the poorest draft capital teams in the entire NFL, missing their second-round pick. There are a couple teams below them, but there aren't many in terms of having really limited draft capital. And number three is they can trade Patrick Queen. And it's a question of what value you get for him. But it's also a question of designing your roster so you don't have to end up paying two inside linebackers. And I really don't think they want to set themselves up with a big nut on the books for Patrick Queen in 2024 when they may need to franchise Lamar again.
Yeah, that's a really good point. They have to make that decision, I think, a week or two after the draft, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, it's like May 7th, maybe.
Yeah. So we'll find out then. What are your chances, I guess, of him getting traded? Do you have an odds on that?
Yeah, of him getting traded. They will do everything they can because they will lose value if they don't unload him here. So, so I'll put on my GM hat for a moment. If they keep Queen under the current contract in which he's he didn't make the Pro Bowl, which is actually a very good thing for Ravens fans and for Ravens. If you're a Ravens season ticket holder, or if you're whatever, I mean, making the Pro Bowl would have been the worst thing in the world because his salary would have jumped significantly. Would have got a significant escalator out of it. So he didn't make the Pro Bowl, even though he played well, and he will be around for year 4 at a reasonable salary, and then in year 5 he'll be around. And I forget what the number is at inside linebacker, but it's somewhat significant. And he would then be around for that. They can't afford to franchise him for sure, but they might hold him around on the 5th-year contract. If they decide the 5th-year value is too much, then they basically have truncated a fair amount of the value of Patrick Queen because somebody else doesn't believe the 5th-year value is too much. Okay, they're going to believe that's reasonable. So if they cut it off, they cut off value of Patrick Queen that they then have in the organization, and they can't trade him for as much. So I think the chance that he plays with the Ravens this year on the salary is not insignificant, but it's also not the outcome they want.
I agree with that. I think it's unfortunate that the business of football is like that, but he's just he's depreciating value right now, and it's basically I always look at him as a 1-year rental, almost almost like an in-season trade, if you may. Of we trade a 3rd-round pick or whatever he'll get us back to have his services for the year.
That's a great point. That's exactly how you should look at it as a GM. So what? We didn't have to trade any pick to get Patrick Queen. We gave up the right of a 3rd-round pick, and that's exactly how you should look at it. The Ravens obviously will have to look at their weak side linebacker position and look at their ability to platoon. I think they've got great ability to platoon in-house. I think they have that right now. And hey, if the other situation is you draft another safety, or don't even draft another safety. Get another safety. The safeties are cheap as hell to find, whether it's a free agency after the draft, whether it means you find that guy as a UDFA that they like again. I mean, they're very easy to find. Ozzie proved that time after time in terms of dime backs. They can easily platoon at that weak side linebacker spot if that's.
Lowe's knows how to get your lawn ready for spring. And right now, you can take up to $10 off select Scott's fertilizers. Plus, you can save $50 on a Craftsman 20-volt 13-inch string trimmer and leaf blower combo kit. Now just $99. Get set for spring. Visit us in-store or online today because Lowe's knows home improvement. Valid 3/23 through 4/5. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. Excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
That's what they want to do.
Yep, for sure. I think they're moving in that direction, and based on Queen's market, we'll decide how fast.
Yeah. I like the way you think about that particular thing, and it's kind of like the go for it on fourth down situation. There's risk in going for it on fourth down, sure. There's a lot of risk in not going for it on fourth down. That's it. You punt the ball away. The other team may drive up the field and score the winning touchdown or get the score that puts you in a bad position. But every path in life has risk associated with it, and if there's truly a riskless path, the other path doesn't even exist. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the way you look at that problem.
I do. Yeah, I look at. I've been very molded by the Rush lyric and Free Will of if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
Oh, that's a good one. Put it in song lyrics. Very good.
Yeah.
All right, we heard a good little snippet from John Harbaugh about the value of Chuck Smith and having just on the edge position with Vas Loricos. I thought it was very telling just how many players kept coming up that don't really have a refined toolkit and would really benefit from working with Chuck Smith. And I think he's going to. I really expect him to do wonders for the outside linebacker group. I hope he's a guy the Ravens can retain for a couple of years at least, because I think he'd do wonders. Assistant coaches, they tend to move along when they're position coaches and they get coordinator roles. If Chuck Smith has a big year with Owe and Ajabo, you'd have to figure he's either going to get a big money opportunity somewhere else, which hopefully the Ravens could match, or a big increase in responsibility opportunity that he can't pass up, whether that means a larger assistant defensive coordinator role or an actual defensive coordinator role or whatever it might be. But really looking forward to Chuck Smith. He referenced back to 2008 training camp. Chuck Smith apparently was in the building with the Ravens. I didn't realize that. Yeah,
he did. I didn't realize it either. And honestly, I didn't know who this guy was until we acquired him a couple months back or whatever it was. But there was a lot of hype on Twitter about it. So I was like, okay, great. But yeah, it seems like this is a nice acquisition. You always can remember that coaches don't count against the cap. So great way to exploit the cap, so to speak, and get more value out of the players that do.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I'm sorry, I got distracted here for a second. Talked about the big three wide receiver prospects, and we're back over to Ortiz for this one. And he, I think, gave us a fair amount on each of them in terms of what they bring. Then there was another question that came back about the next two guys. So the next two guys were Flowers and Quentin Jefferson. The first three were, I don't have it in front of me right now. I'm sorry, I'm blanking.
Yeah, I don't remember. Did they ask about the big three wide receivers, or are those your words? No, I think they mentioned them by name, and they asked about the three big wide receivers. Anyway, Ortiz had comments to make about each of them, and Flowers and Jefferson, and I thought the interesting point about that, and this is something that I completely agree with, is really need to watch how drops occur. So they hand placement drops, or they focus drops, trying to get up the field. He didn't mention every type, but it was a really good point in terms of grading receivers, and that was something I liked from his comments. He didn't answer too many questions on the day, but there were times when I felt like Joe should have been answering the question, not Harbaugh. Yeah, and there was a few times where it looked like they did a little handoff, so to speak, to see who's going to talk. But I find it interesting. Like the reason I was asking you about big three wide receivers, I don't really see it as big three. And I also I just find it very interesting to see how everyone views these wide receivers because there are just a lot of differing opinions of even the top guys and where to rank them. So they did talk about Johnson and his ability to catch, and also that's something I've been reading up on more this year. I've always listened to Matt Waldman, but this is my first year buying his RSP. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. He does this huge breakdown. It's like over 1,100 pages of people.
No,
that
I do not get that. I'm going to take a look at that, I think.
Yeah, he does this huge thing, and he always talks about like clap attacking the ball and different hands techniques, and it's like very deep on each person and how they catch the ball, and that's something that I've been learning more about this year in my process, and it's something I've noticed, I've seen, but it's nice to have actual words for it.
We talk about it a little bit of the tight end thing, because I mean, double catching the football is bad, but most tight ends don't do that. They have the big hands, they single catch the ball. The thing that the tight ends, some of them are really adept at catching the ball away from their bodies. Some of it like it right on top of their bodies, and I think that leads to drops. I don't like that at all. Mm-hmm. And the Patrick Queen missed interceptions, a couple of them from last year. One where he caught it like right next to his face mask and it bounced off through his hands and off the mask. You give yourself an additional chance to tip it to yourself if you catch it a little bit away from your body. So anyway, love that stuff. DeCastro was asked about the lack of free agents, and he said, we signed a lot of guys who wanted back. Never been a big free agency team. The draft will always be our biggest and best way to improve the team. There's an important point here, is that the Ravens really cannot sign anyone more before the draft at this point. They've almost codified that with comments today, but they didn't say why. But the reason is that they have a 4th round compensatory pick coming back for Powers. It was already kind of a gut-wrenching move, I'm sure, to have to give up the money for Aguilar and also know they're losing a 6th round pick that they would have had for Josh Oliver.
Yeah.
So, that's meaningful additional draft capital. And if you're in the form of, hey, I want more draft picks, well, don't trade away a draft pick. You just trade away a draft pick for and no, we didn't have it yet. No, you did have it, and you traded and you let it get away. That's exactly what happened. It was a kind of manna from heaven, a gift that they got a huge contract for Oliver. Maybe they were expecting it, but I sure wasn't. And that was it's a shame that they couldn't hold on to that.
I'm curious how much they value a 6th round compensatory pick, because it's effectively a 7th round pick, right? And there are like no JJ points. So at that point, it's really just getting I think of like round 6 and 7 as they're not quite UDFAs, preferential UDFA treatment. And that's worth something. Don't get me wrong. Because we've seen plenty of great players come out of the 6th and 7th round, mostly the 6th, but for obvious reasons. But I definitely think it was curious for them to give up that late 6th round pick. It soured me on the Aguilar acquisition, frankly. Like when I first heard about it, I was nonplussed, and then when I heard we lost the compensatory pick, I was like, "That's a bridge too far."
Just pissed.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just he better really take the top off the defense in terms of his contributions to the Ravens offense. And why be mad at the player?
It's not. Yeah,
he put that deal in front of the team put it in front of him, and that's where you can get upset, I think. And if you look at the Ravens' 6th round success in their history, sure, they've had plenty of misses, but the hits they've had have been really good ones. Chuck Clark, Adelius Thomas were both 6th round draft picks. They mentioned Tyrod Taylor in the press conference today. I mean, but the Ozzie Smith, I can always get you a cheap dime back is often predicated on a 6th round pick, and it was also a guy, if he spent as much as a 6th round pick on it, he was also getting a core special teams player. So you're getting a combination of real high leverage defensive play plus a core special teams player. And he was just extremely adept at that, at finding the guys who really met that profile. What else we got here? Let's see. Harbs' comments about receivers and having superpowers to overcome their size was just kind of some comic relief. This was interesting. I thought the question of, will the presence of Ajabo and Oweh impact the decision to draft an edge? And EDC responds with, if Will Anderson is there, I think we'll take him. Well, yep. That's good. That's why it's the badminton racket. Of course, it does influence the Ravens' likelihood of going after an edge. And if faced in a situation where they have an edge in a corner, I think they're probably going to take a corner if they're roughly equal on the board. Mm-hmm. But, it was Ortiz who finally mentioned the importance of Sam characteristics. And it was a fleeting comment. It might have even been more than what DaCosta really wanted to give away during the meeting. Mm-hmm. But it's the kind of thing where he talked about, different characteristics, guys who play well in space, guys who can drop from the line of scrimmage. And, saying that those two things, which are basically very similar things about playing well in space and dropping from the line of scrimmage, is telling me the Ravens are really focused on getting a Sam linebacker this year, as opposed to a pure rush guy. But then Ortiz reversed himself and said, but if we can get a pure, huge rush guy, he had some word for it that indicated that they would be amenable to that too.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I listened to your edge commentary with Voss, and I agree. Like, doesn't hurt to get more of those kind of guys, keep them in a rotation. They've effectively lost one so far with Houston being gone. So there are
Houston
snaps.
Get signed?
Well, he's not currently signed.
Right. And JPP is not currently signed either, as far as I know.
Yeah.
But they're both, one of those two probably comes back.
Yeah, so. Probably JPP. I couldn't remember if JPP had a 2-year deal. It's that he gets money this year regardless. He counts against this year's cap. That's how they structured it. So he is gone, not currently on the roster, but yeah, he will get money from us. Yeah, I think it's an interesting time. One thing that I would love to know, and I don't think I'll ever have the pleasure of knowing, is do they rate their board with that positional need in mind? So would that edge player already be behind the corner, or are they looking at the board and being like, well, we know we don't want, I'm wondering how baked in those biases are into their board.
Right. So Sweetholder events in the past, this is a long time ago. Now we're talking about 2009, 2010. They would take you right into the draft room after the board had been taken down and the draft had occurred. But you would still see all of these individual plaques that they would post up for each team. The plaques themselves individually had a series of dots on them that meant different things. So Red Star is the famous one. A Red Star player is one that some individual scout is going out on a limb for, saying, I love this guy as a Raven, plays like a Raven, he'd be perfect for us, yada, yada, yada kind of thing. And those players were marked with a Red Star. If you were a 3-year starter, you got a half a pink dot. If you're a 4-year starter, you got a full pink dot. If you were let me think something. There's some combination of various combine tests that if you got so much in 3 categories, then you would get a blue dot. And the big one was a black dot. You get a black dot if you had an injury question, or if you had a off-field character concern. Mm-hmm. Okay, or I guess it's generalized character concern. And the Ravens did actually have a black dot player that they drafted that year's Arthur Jones on the year I saw the board like that, and that ended up turning very well. But he dropped in terms of where the Ravens had him. To get back to your original question, I think they have an agnostic board they're working from, and then they fit in need at the time of the pick. So I think they're saying, well, these 3 guys are all better, and they're all 7.5s, and we're drafting a 7 here if we go down to draft this corner, but we don't really need a quarterback, a tight end, or a 3-tech. Mm-hmm. And so they might legitimately do it that way. But I think they keep their board agnostic, and that's why they've got this BPA board is a starting point. I think it's a good way to do it. I mean, what I would always say is separate the factors as much as you possibly can in how you're doing it. So don't create a combined form that already includes the 2 factors. It's a naturally fluid situation. You want to be able to react to that on draft day.
Yep. And I think that makes sense. Now we've kind of talked through it, that your needs also do change as you make more picks. So keeping the board unfiltered by need makes sense. I thought one of the best questions of the day came right at the very end is, what have misses
taught you over the years? And whoever it was, might have been Viviano, might have been somebody else, said, obviously you've had a lot more hits than misses over the years, but what have the misses taught you? And he said, when we've missed, it's often been a case of need competing with value. He didn't say it exactly that way, but that's exactly what it is. It's need competes with value. If you have a BPA board and you can draft by it, and he did address this to some degree, he said, generally speaking, you're going to do pretty well, even if it's over multiple years. But it's once you start imposing need on your BPA board, on your value board, that you end up potentially going awry. And, this guy's the last cornerback, we got to have it because we need a cornerback kind of thing, is where need comes in, and you'll often end up with not as good a result on the pick as you might hope to have. I got one more thing to say, but hear your thoughts on that.
Oh no, you go ahead.
I thought the other thing actually is different, but tell me what you think about that first.
I definitely think that there is there's always like a little bit of gamemanship going on in the draft as far as amount of guys in a tier and not being left holding the bag. I think it is a good point, though. I think that there might be bad picks made when the scarcity is getting high.
Yep.
And I think that's something that they know about. You got to get all that corrected in the pre-draft process when they do their simulations and their war rooming. That's, I think, how you can best learn where those tendencies are in this year's draft and like how you feel about them. It's better to live it now than 3 weeks from now. So I think there will always be times for a situation you didn't quite see coming, or, the results make you look back differently on the process. But I'm confident in their wargaming that they're able to kind of predict the future of how this draft will play out, and having gone through those decision points before the actual day helps a lot.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see if the Ravens do any mock drafting where they try and get people who are outside the building, because that would make a lot of sense, because you don't want the same people who've heard all the exact same things from your scouts evaluating players and making the decisions on those bases. This might be an area where you go to some really well-known bloggers for each team, say, and you try and find ones for all the other 31 teams that are not the Ravens. You have one of your own guys do the Ravens, or your own draft room, do the Ravens for you. And try and figure out if that would work. But I think that would be an interesting way to war game your way through it. The problem is you're also giving out information if you do that. If you then have the Ravens have taken so and so off the board at that point, well, then that kind of gives away some of your own drafting strategy. So it might be the kind of thing, hire Brian Billick and a bunch of other people who are coaches who have left the game and whatnot, and then it gets into a question of does Brian Billick still stay in tune with it enough to know all the players who are on the draft board in 2023? And I just don't know the answer to that. He might not.
Potentially, yeah. Get a bunch of people from the end of the bar, have them do some draft picks.
That's what it would be.
I do think I'm trying to think how you could like do this without tipping your hand too much. You could always just be like, here's the board, make your selection, go to the next person. Here's the board, make your selection. And they don't get to see who anyone else has picked.
No, that's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Why do you care who else has been picked? You already see how the boards went. You can infer that these.
So you only get the board when it's your turn to select.
Correct.
But then that also does take a component of the wargaming away, because you can't say, well, a player dropped 6 spots further than I thought. I'd like to move up 8 to get him. You can't make that trade. So you lose a value.
Without trading. Yeah, it's super hard. So you would have to organize it from a third party that's not associated with the Ravens, unless you knew their books. And that's how you could do it.
Yeah, I guess you could have an NDA, but it's really just too important to.
I agree.
They wouldn't do it.
High risk.
All right, he did say one other really interesting thing, I thought, in terms of what he's learned from the misses, and that is that you can't discount a negative minority report. And he mentioned one specific scout, and this was really interesting. Ron Marcinak, as being a guy who didn't give a crap what other scouts thought of players, and so he had a first round guy. He could toss an undraftable tag on him, and that he'd occasionally done that, And, we look back at that, there were cases where the guys were out of the league in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So for, a guy from the past who has a Baltimore connection, Aaron Maben was a guy who was built like a wide receiver and trying to make it as a pass rusher in the NFL. There were some doubts about his frame at the time, but people fell in love with the quickness and the bend and whatnot that he had, and basically hand waved away all of the I'm way too small to play edge at 228 or whatever, 225 or whatever he was. But I'm thinking of him as being a specific player that Marcinak might not have liked and might have said, he's undraftable at that size. He just can't play the position.
I appreciated that. I definitely think there's a lot of value, and I'm curious how much the Ravens are able to pull this off where they don't pay attention to everyone else's opinions until much later and then how much they let that weigh in on their decision making. I try to stay as pure as I can in a way with looking at prospects. Unfortunately, I always have to look somewhere to get an idea of who the heck these people are because I don't watch enough college football to have an opinion. But it is important to me in my process, and I think it should be for anyone who cares about this enough to put their name on these players, that it's your thoughts. It's who you need to have a grade on. And I think there is a lot of value in one bad scout. I think when people are really negative on these young men, they're doing it for hopefully a very valid reason in their minds. And then it's not just to, they even said that in the press conference. They don't want to smear anybody.
Right.
So you're always looking optimistically in this time frame, trying to figure out what these people can be with their traits. But there is value in knowing when you want to take a stand and say, no, this is not a player for me and not for this organization.
Right. Yeah. They definitely did reference some of that in terms of the injuries and whatnot. And they said in terms of injuries, they don't take anybody off their board. I don't know that they ever addressed directly taking people off the board for character concerns, but I do know that they passed on Larry Tunsil to pick Ronnie Stanley. Mm-hmm. That is the most classic character concern thing ever. I mean, I don't even think it'd be considered nearly as significant today with marijuana so widely available and used, but just some of the judgment that went along with it was not good. The fact that there's a video out there of him wearing a pot mask is not a good thing for purposes of him realizing, hey, I'm going to be playing in the NFL. I ought to take care of myself. I ought to, keep myself in a better position than that. I think the Ravens have had significant character concerns in the past which has caused them to pass on players.
For sure.
All right. Outstanding. I thought, pretty interesting conference in total. Once they got past a lot of the Lamar stuff, there was a lot of little interesting tidbits about the draft that were fun to hear. Any other points you want to make before we call it off?
It was very refreshing to get a conference that wasn't about Lamar, frankly. There's so much more to talk about this time of year. And I was glad that we did get those tidbits. So looking forward to the draft. Hope that it falls nicely for us and we're able to make some really high quality picks.
Yeah. Well, me too. It's been a pleasure. Tell people where they can talk football with you.
Sure. You can find us at One Winning Pod on Twitter, onewinningpod.com, and also on YouTube, One Winning Pod. We just put out our offensive player discussion today. We'll do our defensive discussion next week, and then we'll have kind of our Red Star episode where we talk about the players we really want the Ravens to target, our favorite guys for the Ravens at values that kind of makes sense with what we are dealing with. And that'll kind of wrap it up for this season.
And you'll be joining us from the Netherlands on draft night.
That's my hope, man, because I can't imagine not seeing the first round. There's too much at stake for the Ravens. I just care about seeing how this plays. I also care about seeing how these quarterbacks play out. I'm just personally invested now. I'm curious how my evaluations will translate to the NFL. I'm always curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah, we were actually out of the country for when Flacco got drafted. So that was
really?
And actually all of them for that matter. I at least was in the hotel looking at it for the Ray Rice pick. Mm-hmm. But we were out of the country for Flacco, and the whole thing, dropping down then going back up, it was a kind of an oddball situation.
For sure.
All right. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study short, hit me up with a DM on Twitter. It could be any topic at all you want to talk about. Franchise building, the draft, if you like. This is the time to get in with those kind of topics. I'll get back to you very quickly. And if you want to do a That One Play episode, Still lots of opportunity to do that before the exhibition season starts. The preseason starts. And we're looking forward to that. Alec, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks so much, Ken.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.
Lowe's knows how to get your lawn ready for spring. And right now, you can take up to $10 off select Scott's fertilizers. Plus, you can save $50 on a Craftsman 20-volt 13-inch string trimmer and leaf blower combo kit. Now just $99. Get set for spring. Visit us in-store or online today because Lowe's knows home improvement. Valid 3/23 through 4/5. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. Excludes Alaska and Hawaii.